Thank you, Tori. I think you channeled Margaret Fuller quite well. Not that I ever met Margaret Fuller, but you know. So, well, let me just begin before I start talking about Margaret Fuller and mysticism. Let me just say how good it is to be back with you after a little bit of time away. And I hope everyone, as I said earlier, had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. I was able to spend some quality grandpa time in Massachusetts. And I want to thank everyone here who made that time away possible, including Reverend Leah and Scott and our worship weavers like Angela and Tori and others. Laura Wallace, who I understand led a wonderful service last Sunday. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Margaret Fuller, she's not super well known anymore. Margaret Fuller was a writer and editor, as Tori said, a journalist, an early feminist, I think that's fair to say, and a key leader of the literary, cultural, and spiritual movement that came to be known as Transcendentalism. Of course, Emerson and Thoreau get most of the Transcendentalist headlines. I think it's fair to say from the reading and research that I've done that Margaret Fuller not only was just as important as the two of them, but probably had the finest mind of any of the Transcendentalists. And she, of course, was a friend and colleague of Emerson's and Thoreau's, the Alcott family, and so many others. Now, Margaret Fuller was also a Unitarian, although, as you heard from our reading, not a very happy one. That was a Unitarian church that she was fleeing from. I don't know, maybe that's not the right word. Now, I have to say that whenever I preach about one or more of the Transcendentalists, I find myself paying tribute to an extraordinary group of cultural, literary, and spiritual radicals whose vision of religion continues to play and have an enormous influence on our faith tradition. But during their lifetimes, the Transcendentalists were pretty harsh and unforgiving critics of really all organized religion, but especially the Unitarian side of our tradition. Emerson, Thoreau, Fuller, they were all ex-Unitarians. I mean, I think they really were still Unitarians. Many of them wrote of Unitarianism's deadening effect and referred to what they heard preached from many Unitarian pulpits as being, and this really hits hard, corpse cold. Ouch. That was actually Emerson that said that, but now it's at this point in this, when I've told this story in the past, that I frequently, and I'm about to do it again, get sidetracked by this defensive urge to stick up for my dull and corpse cold ministerial colleagues from yesteryear. And I have to tell you, I feel especially sorry for this gentleman, the picture's rather blurry. This is Reverend Barzillai Frost, love his first name. He was the minister at First Parish in Concord, Massachusetts, which of course is the town that many of the Transcendentalists hung out in. In fact, it was poor Reverend Frost whom Emerson famously criticized in his divinity school address, which is still read widely today, when Emerson speaks of once listening to a preacher whose sermon was so dull and lifeless that Waldo vowed he would never set foot inside a church again, and who he accused of leaving the worshiper feeling defrauded and disconsolate. Oh, wow, that's a pretty harsh critique to live down in the pages of history. And I have to say, I am very relieved that Waldo is not sitting in the back pew today, which he did when he was not out on the lecture circuit sitting back there judging Reverend Frost, who was standing in this position here. Now, I have to tell you that I felt so bad for poor Barzillai that I tried to do a little research on him, and I tracked down an excerpt from the eulogy that was delivered at his memorial service. And it said that he was a man of great cheerfulness of spirit and offered unfailing support to his congregants, and especially to those who were sick and dying. In other words, while he may not have been a great preacher, old Barzillai did some darn good ministry. And I have to confess, I wish I could go into every edition of Emerson's essays and add a little footnote that says, you know what, this corpse cold, dull minister, he might have been a bad preacher, but he was a good guy and a kind soul. Okay, I got that out of my system. So let's get back to Margaret Fuller now. So after enduring what felt like another dull and deadening Unitarian worship service, she takes a long walk in the woods and then has a life-changing experience when she encounters beams of sunlight among trees near a small pool of water. In that moment, young Margaret Fuller realizes, as she says so beautifully, that there's no separate self, and that for the first time in her life, she experiences this deep connection that she refers to as the all. As Fuller says so beautifully, she was taken up into God, dwelling in the ineffable and the unutterable. Now, again, I have to say that as much as I admire Emerson and Thoreau's beautiful descriptions of their experiences in nature, Margaret Fuller's, I think, speaks most closely to those moments in my own life when I have experienced that deep connectedness to something greater than myself. Those experiences have frequently occurred in beautiful, breathtaking places, moments when I've looked on with awe at a fabulous sunset, or one extremely memorable time when I stood atop a cliff in southwest England, in Cornwall, looking out over the English Channel during a snow squall. Now, it isn't all about nature. I've certainly had those powerful and transcendent moments of abundant joy when I've been with family, like holding that new granddaughter. And I just want to say, and again, this is me being a parish minister here, contrary to the Transcendentalists, I find deep connectedness inside Unitarian Universalist worship services. I've also been inspired while listening to ministerial colleagues like Reverend Leah and many others preaching inspiring sermons. So there, take that, Waldo. And I have to say, it is that deep sense of connection and well-being that are at the heart of mysticism in the mystic way. Mysticism, if we could define it, is about experiencing, connecting, realizing, having a taste, if you will, of one's deep connectedness to, and I'm going to say more about to what in a minute. It's about experiencing something greater, something that is at the center of and yet just beyond our everyday awareness, something that enables us to realize, in the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who I've quoted to you several times before, helps us realize our, and these are Heschel's words, our adjacency to eternity. I love that language so much. Now, I know some of the terminology that I'm using here to describe mysticism is kind of vague. imprecise, and okay, mysterious. But in many ways, that's the whole point. Mysticism and mystical experiences are not about having all the answers, having the correct, true, right beliefs, or putting our experiences into a particular theological, religious, or creedal box. In fact, you don't have to be religious, spiritual, or a believer in anything to be a mystic. I think mysticism and mystical experiences are ultimately about being open to awe and wonder, open to that deep sense of connection, open to experiencing, I think, that unity and oneness that Margaret Fuller experienced, a unity and oneness we may never fully understand, but that somehow connects us to what she calls the all. Now, let me say a word about the connection that Fuller makes between her mystical experience and God. I know that the idea of God, the concept of God, the belief in God, it can be confusing, maybe problematic, and for some, even hurtful based on past experiences. And the word God may conjure images or ideas that look and feel very different from what Margaret Fuller experienced that day. In fact, when it comes to the whole God question, I don't think there can be any doubt that while the Transcendentalists believed in the existence and the reality of something they called God, they most certainly, and they are very clear about this, did not find the divine in doctrines, dogmas, or creeds. They didn't believe in a God who judges or excludes, or a God who resides above humankind or looks like an old white guy with a long beard. Instead, what the Transcendentalists called God is that, and here's language again, that overarching, sometimes overwhelming connection and connectedness. That connectedness that in moments takes our breath away and that transformed the despair and anguish Margaret Fuller was feeling into peace and serenity and joy. I know that when I have been blessed with those kinds of experiences, something happens to me. My breathing calms. Whatever anxiety I'm feeling diminishes. And all the burdens that I'm carrying that are weighing me down, they just seem to fade into the background. As I stand on a beach looking out over a vast ocean or gaze up at a clear night sky with beautiful stars, or sing a moving hymn with all of you, I become lost, but lost in the best sense of the word. Lost in the beauty of what I am feeling and experiencing in the moment. At that time, there is no, and this is what I think was similar to what Margaret Fuller experienced, there's no separation, no division, no us versus them, or me against the world. In those blessed moments, there's only love and connection. As I awaken, realize that I am part of that endless ocean, that I am part of that awe-inspiring sky, that I am part of that beautiful hymn. And as I experience that unity and that peace, I invariably find myself wondering what it all means. I have to say that I never come to a definitive conclusion or a final answer. You know what? That's okay, because the mystic way invariably leads me back to mystery rather than to obvious or easy answers. Not that answers don't sometimes come, but no matter how many times I stare up at those stars or gaze out at that vast ocean, I am always left at some level with ambiguity rather than certainty, with more questions than answers. Inevitably, I always find myself living in the mystery, a mystery that calls and inspires me to keep seeking, to keep exploring. Now, there was a time in my spiritual journey when I thought having more questions and not very many answers was not a good thing. Questions about God or ultimate reality meant that one was spiritually lost or confused. It also meant that my immortal soul was at risk, and that a one-way ticket to a very hot and unpleasant place might very well be in my future. But then I found this religion, Unitarian Universalism, and my whole attitude and understanding of mystery and questioning changed. Unitarian Universalism is a religion that embraces and celebrates mystery, that finds inspiration in our questions, and that invites and encourages us to seek and to explore as we experience the beauty and wonder of life. One of the things I love most about being a Unitarian Universalist is our willingness to affirm that we don't have all the answers, that we are still and will always be learning and growing, and that questions about God and the nature of existence require, first and foremost, that we explore them from a place of openness and humility, a humility that embraces the mystery that surrounds us and that always leaves our mind and our heart and our spirit open to new experiences, new truths, new ways of understanding ourselves and the universe. And that takes me back to those moments of deep connection that are at the heart of the mystic way. When we open our hearts and our minds and our spirits, we may find answers to those questions, or we may not. I know I'm still searching, still experiencing, still questioning. I don't know if I'll ever find a single truth or a final answer that captures everything I experience in those moments. If and when I do, I can guarantee you it will make its way into a Sunday morning sermon. But for now, I'm content to live in the mystery of a world and a universe that is so beautiful, so breathtaking, and that fills my heart with awe and wonder. A world and a universe I'll never fully understand, but that is always calling to me, always inspiring me, always welcoming me home. And you know, perhaps it is that same spirit of openness and humility that can guide us as we look for answers to the many challenges our world is facing. I don't know, I'm not very confident that there is a single answer or a single solution that will right all the wrongs or heal all the wounds. I'm guessing there are probably many different answers and many different solutions, many of which we probably haven't even discovered or thought about yet. But what I do know is that if we are to find a way forward, we will need to begin by listening to one another, by remembering that none of us has all the answers, and by being open to the experiences and the ideas of others. And while we may not know where those experiences and ideas will take us, I think they will ultimately reveal that in the midst of all of our differences and all that divides and separates the human family, we are ultimately one and deeply connected. There is an underlying unity in the midst of our diversity, a oneness in the midst of our variety. Perhaps that realization is the beginning of an answer and a path. And friends, may we join together and journey together on that path of oneness and connection. And let's journey together with openness, with humility, and always with great, great love. Amen, and blessed be.